A national inquiry has started today into why IT products cost much more in Australia than the rest of the world. A federal parliamentary committee is looking into claims that tech companies are overcharging local consumers for everything, from music downloads to games. The industry argues it's more expensive to do business here, which is a claim rejected by consumer groups. So far, Apple, Microsoft and Adobe are refusing to give evidence to the investigation. Luke Hopewell from technology guide Gizmodo says computer software is one of the worst examples of blatant overpricing.
What you find with software, however, especially when it's digitally distributed, that's adding insult to injury, because you can see the price that's there on the global wholesale price that the US and the UK and Europe are paying, for example. And then you hit the button that says you're from Australia and you get that $9,000 surcharge. It's really outrageous. We're getting pretty much exactly the same product. It's just being it's been marked up for the Australian jurisdiction.
Labor backbencher Ed Husic pushed for this inquiry into the price discrepancies. He's been at the hearing in Sydney today and he joins us in the studio. Welcome to The Drum.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we know who didn't come to the inquiry and I'd like to talk about that in a second, but can you tell us if you did hear any significant evidence today?
Look, it was interesting from a number of levels. I mean, we heard a lot of the things that we would expect to hear, that labour's high, taxes, rent and all those type of regular issues that are thrown up in relation to this matter, which we dealt with one by one. What was interesting was, in particular, because we had a focus on music downloads, was having a sense of the impact of royalties on, for example, downloads themselves. And music sales in this country are starting to grow again, and it's a big issue. And certainly, when you realise the royalties are only 9% of the total cost of a download, and what really gets people going is that Australian artists, if you purchase them on, say, for example, the Apple iTunes store here in Australia, actually cost you more to download here than if you were an American downloading that same Australian artist in the United States, and people just don't get why those differences exist. But, I mean, for some of the other things that have been mentioned, and Luke Hopewell mentioned earlier, there are some other big differences that are hurting business. But
you mentioned some of the rationale that were given by the IT companies. So, labour, rental costs, the greater expenses. They were brought up again today, and I'm sure you've heard them many times.
Yeah.
How much weight can we give to those? Like, how much can we attribute of the extra price to those factors?
Well, I don't think, certainly they're factors, but not to the extent that the vendors here in Australia would like to point
25%,
out.
50%?
Well, let me give you an example. So Choice's submission was really good because they broke down some of the factors. For example, rent, they reckon, probably has 3% of the total markup may go to rent. If you look at taxes, the GST is pretty comparable to state-based taxes in the US. You'll hear vendors say, well, the cost of providing warranties here is a big deal. But in actual fact, in the last year, like, our government has actually harmonised the warranty process, so you have a national framework compared to a multiple number of jurisdictions in the states that have various warranty conditions. So, those, I just don't think that you can tread water with those type of excuses. It really comes down to, this is what the market's been prepared to bear, because that's the price that's been charged, and that's what we've had to cop.
Do you believe that the inquiry will be significantly hampered by the fact that these companies are not turning up to be publicly questioned?
Well, today at the inquiry, what was interesting is the association said, we're here to represent the members. And then when we had specific examples of issues that we wanted to raise with them, we then informed, well, we can't actually, you'll need to speak directly to the member to be able to find out what the answer is. Well, if you don't have your member like Apple turning up, or Microsoft's not turning up because Apple's not turning up, and others say, well, we'll participate at some point down the track, but don't actually put in an anchor point at where they will, it's a real problem for us to be able to get to the bottom of why these differences occur.
Right. David, you have a question?
Yeah, well, there's one thing about having differential pricing. I've never understood why there's different stores anyway. Why is there an Australian iTunes store or a US one? How are they able to detect it? And why can't we have systems in place in this country that prevent that detection, so you can sign up from wherever you want? And I'd add that it's not just software and computer stuff either. There's a large department store in the United States that you can buy from and ship to Australia, but if you compare the prices on the two stores, it's automatically 35% higher if you click you're from Australia.
Yep. And that is an issue that came up today, this whole way in which companies set up what's called geo-blocking, where they detect where you're from your IP address, and they don't allow you to actually purchase. And the other thing is too, Adobe, which provides a lot of the creative software, and a lot of people would know that's how they read their PDFs from. They have now changed their actual site so that you have to nominate where you're from, and you cannot see or do a comparison between the US price and the Australian price. And that form of geo-blocking we've discovered is permissible under our trade agreements. So this will become another area that the inquiry will look at to examine, well, why do we allow this type of thing to occur? Is it an impediment to competition, and does it inhibit choice for consumers, along the lines of what you were mentioning earlier?
So as a government member, what do you think government policy should be on this?
Well, I actually think I don't think competition is working as well as it should in this area. I think there are a number of artificial barriers that have been put in place purely to protect the interests of those companies. So under trade agreements, for example, they get a great new market that they can operate in, they get a new consumer base, but they want to do it completely on their own terms, so that there's not reciprocity in the benefit of having that agreement in place. So certainly I think we do need to look at things like trade agreements, and I certainly also think in terms of competition law as well, where price discrimination had been a feature of the Trade Practices Act, but it had been removed in years gone past, and it's probably worth re-examining that issue again. I think the internet has opened up so many options for people and opportunities for people, and I think this actually runs counter to it. And finally, you've got sectors of the industry that think, for example, like geo-blocking. We had the Communications Alliance today, John Stanton, saying, what companies should actually stop this practice altogether, and they should look at dropping their prices, because in some cases it's been shown that dropping prices increases revenue and increases consumers rather than the reverse.
Richard, you had a quick question.
Yeah, look, I mean, politicians talk about cost of living all the time, so congrats for actually looking at something that it really does affect people's lives. Is it surprising to you that industry groups who supported a free trade agreement between Australia and the US, who supported the idea that free trade would be good, are actually now out there defending what I think is indefensible? Like, I would have expected the industry groups in Australia to say Australian firms need cheap software. What's going on?
Well, it's hard for me as a committee member to hear. We were touching on those issues earlier, Julia, about the the regular culprits of tax or rent or warranties or whatever, and talking about that adding cost. My big issue in this inquiry and this issue overall is the amount of or the added layer of cost of business across the country as a result of these prices being harder than what they should. So you have an industry association on one hand defending the industry, saying, well, we're wearing costs, but their members are actually driving up costs for other businesses. And so as much as there's a general consumer frustration and angst about the prices as well, I think there's a microeconomic issue that's at play here that really does need to be tackled.
Thank you, Ed, and I'm sure you've been watching the Olympics like everyone else in the country. For our final point, as Australia comes to terms with Olympic disappointments over the weekend, the negative headlines about stars who failed to shine, including swimmer James Magnussen, have already started. The British tabloids aren't holding back either, slamming their athletes who failed to win medals. Galen Clues is a former world #1 triathlete and Australian Olympic team sports psychologist. She says the weight of expectations can drain an athlete of energy, and coaches use many tactics to avoid distractions.
We're not going to go through and read the newspaper articles and constantly be reminded what the expectations are that everyone has of us in order to perform. We sort of put them in a bit of a bubble and removed that, because even things that are exciting and positive can still be energy draining, and the athlete really has to be able to just manage that energy, because it's all got to be pumped through that athletic performance.
And just very quickly, because we're almost out of time, are we too tough on our athletes?
I think we are. I do think we are. I think we expect them to be not only sort of supremely strong and athletic, but also kind of higher moral beings somehow, and it's just not possible.
Richard?
Yeah, I agree. I think, we have a tendency to put all sorts of people on pedestals because I think we like knocking them off again.
Right. It's a bit unfortunate when it comes to the Olympics, David.
I think it's entirely justifiable to question people. I've got no problem with doing that. And, you know, it's up to them to prove themselves. I think it's great.
So their coaches should be, you know, training them to manage the things that we say or think.
Absolutely. That's part of being a professional athlete.
But don't quiz Mal Brough.
I had a lump in my throat watching Steph Rice's interview right after the race that she was unable to win. I just thought, you know, there's so much that they put in and they can't make it. It's very hard going.
And, well, that's all for the drum tonight. Thanks so much to our panel, Jackie Maley, Richard Dennis and David Miles, as well as Ed Husic. Join us again, same time tomorrow night. We'll see you then.